Survival horror. Depending on when you were born or what type of person you are, a couple different things could pop into your head. You could be thinking of Five Nights at Freddy's, or Inky Blinky in the Ink Blink Machine, or whatever that game is. Maybe you think of Amnesia, Penumbra, or Outlast. Any of these games that have the cat and mouse run and hide system that Frictional Games pioneered so many years ago. But if you mention survival horror to me, there's only one thing that comes into my head, and that is
Resident Evil.
The original game that coined the term survival horror is still the best game when it comes to survival horror. But the question is, which Resident Evil is the best Resident Evil? Now there's the Giga Chad camp that believes that suplexing and roundhouse kicking Spanish Europeans as Leon Kennedy is the greatest Resident Evil can get. And don't get me wrong, it's pretty fun. There's also the maybe beta version Leon Kennedy that everyone loves in a Raccoon City Police Department running around in Resident Evil 2 Remake, scurry as hell, but still being able to, have that familiar third-person action that we're so used to from Resident Evil 4. Those are two great options. Honestly, if those are your favorite Resident Evil games, I don't have any problem with it. But you are wrong, because the greatest Resident Evil game ever created is still the first Resident Evil game. Why is that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to get into, and I'm going to explain to you why Resident Evil 1 Remake is the greatest Resident Evil experience that you can have. So let's get right into it. What is a Resident Evil game? Some people may say it's a game about killing zombies, or pharmaceutical industrial complex conspiracy theories, or maybe it's about just one-liners and corny, Leon Kennedy, where's everybody going? Bingo, sure. But the truth is, all of that is just the extras, the flair, the cherry on top for what a Resident Evil game truly is. And that is a puzzle game. And I'm not just talking about the puzzles within the game of Resident Evil, because those are great, but I'm talking about the game as a whole. Resident Evil is a puzzle game through and through that disguises itself as a survival horror game. Every aspect of a great Resident Evil boils down to problem solving. From the map itself being confusing and having locked doors and areas where you wish you could go, but you can't until you get a certain key item. So you got to find the key item, but you got to go somewhere else to get it, and da-da-da-da-da. There's a puzzle right there for you. The enemy encounters are a puzzle. You have to ask yourself when you run into a zombie, do I want to use a bunch of my very limited ammo supply to try to take it out? Or do I want to try to run around it and avoid it and risk getting grabbed and a massive chunk of my health getting taken off? Which, by the way, if you're not playing this game on hard mode, you're doing yourself a disservice, okay? It's supposed to be scary, it's supposed to be difficult, so play it on hard, okay? But here's the thing. Those aren't the only two options when it comes to combat, is to kill or not to kill. That's just the beginning, folks. You see, the puzzle goes much deeper than that. In Resident Evil 1, they added this enemy called the Crimson Head Zombie. So now, you can't just go around killing every zombie and then having a clear game to run through for the entire time. If you kill a zombie in the Resident Evil 1 Remake, an invisible timer begins. And when that timer runs out, said zombie will raise from the ground and come after you with such ferocity and speed that you'll probably pause after pee-peeing your pants once or twice and then turn off the game entirely. It's one of the most terrifying enemies that's ever been put into a game, but you don't have to deal with them if you solve the puzzle correctly. You see, zombies will not resurrect as Crimson Heads if you destroy their head, which, by the way, the headshots in this game, amazing, or if you set their bodies on fire. Both are completely viable options. But here's the thing, it's not as easy as it sounds. If you need to set the body on fire, you need to have kerosene and a lighter on you, which takes sweet inventory spaces. And good luck getting a headshot all the time, because guess what? It's kind of up to chance, which makes them all the more satisfying. But that's what I'm getting at, is it's a puzzle. Every bit of the game needs to be psychoanalyzed. Do I kill the zombie? Do I run around it? Do I have the lighter and kerosene on me to burn it? Do I just kind of think that I'm never going to go back and let the Crimson Head stay? These are all the things that will be running through your head in every encounter in Resident Evil 1. And that's really it. That's really what it boils down to. is the puzzle, figuring it out, figuring out the mystery of the game, figuring out what happened to Bravo Team, why the Spencer Mansion is the way it is, what is the Umbrella Corporation, and that's really it. Beyond the puzzle is simplicity. You see, Resident Evil stories have never been particularly great. Resident Evil 4, you're going to Europe. Resident Evil 5, you're in Africa and you're fighting in a volcano. Resident Evil 6, you're in China, which I don't even know why they do that, because there's never been a virus that's ever come out of that country. They've turned into these globe-trotting, shark-jumping, crazy adventures. You see, there's been about 578,000 Resident Evil games that have ever came out. And they all get kind of progressively more complicated as time goes on. So going back to the original Resident Evil 1, it's actually like a breath of fresh air. It's a simple game with a simple premise. You are part of the Special Tactics and Rescue Services, aka S.T.A.R.S, and you are sent to investigate the disappearance of Bravo Team. You're part of Alpha Team. What's up, Alphas? So, upon investigating the disappearance of this Bravo Team, you run into some zombie pups, and then you end up stuck in this mansion, so on and so forth. Pharmaceutical industrial complex conspiracy theory, some betrayal, bada boom, bada bing, you got a good Resident Evil story. It's all it needs, and it's all it's ever needed. So the story, the simplicity of the story, lends to the nature of the simplicity of the gameplay and the puzzle aspects of the game, giving you more time to focus on what's happening right in front of you instead of what's happening on in the background with the game and the story and the characters and all that stuff, even though there's enough mystery there still. However, there is one very complicated part of Resident Evil 1, and that is the map itself. The map for Resident Evil 1, I would say, is up there with the greatest maps ever created for any video game ever. I would say it probably goes like Dark Souls, Resident Evil 1, and then like Super Metroid. And that list probably changes depending on when you were born, okay? But that's my list. The map is so perfectly interconnected and locked and tied together. You start in the Spencer Mansion, unlocking doors and moving around, and then you move over to the residence outside of the Spencer Mansion, the guardhouse, you could say, and you explore a graveyard and certain things like that. It gets creepy. Then back to the mansion to unlock other places where you haven't been. Oh, but hold on, there's hunters now, so that's a new puzzle that you're gonna have to deal with. And then after exploring that, you go underground and into a secret lab, and bada boom, bada bing, game's over. That is basically all you need from a Resident Evil game. Spooky mansion, or maybe a police department that's like a museum, creepy underground dirty area, or maybe a residence or graveyard or whatever, dirty, dingy, and then underground laboratory. That is a Resident Evil map. That's all you need, okay? And the interconnectedness and the almost Metroidvania-esque style of it, even though it's not quite Metroidvania, is lends to the puzzle nature of the game itself. Now, this all may sound fine and dandy, everything that I've explained so far, but there's a handful of things that hold people back from enjoying the original Resident Evil as much as the newer games. Or I should say, as much as the games from Resident Evil 4 onwards. And I think there's truly only two things that people really don't enjoy about this game, but I think they're just misunderstood. One of them being the ink ribbon system, where you need an ink ribbon on you to be able to save at a typewriter in the game. These ink ribbons are finite, so you can't just go around saving as much as you can after every single thing you do, because you'll run out and then you'll be down creek without a paddle. Okay, it's not good. So there's another puzzle for you. And I guess people just don't like puzzles or something like that, because I don't know why you're complaining about it so much. It's a pretty good system that keeps you disciplined, okay? So the ink ribbon system is the first one, but that's actually a small complaint. I think the biggest complaint that I hear about Resident Evil 1 is the fixed camera angles. Dun, dun, dun. That's right, folks. This is probably the biggest difference between old school Resident Evil and everything from Resident Evil 4 onwards is the fixed camera angles. And with fixed camera angles come tank controls. However, the Resident Evil 4 Remake HD version has an alternate control scheme that I really enjoy. But tank controls are cumbersome, to say the least. They come from an era before controllers had analog sticks. So essentially, moving forward and back with the D-pad will always move your character wherever they're pointing, forward and back. And left to right kind of turns your character. So it's like a tank. You turn left and right, and then you walk forward and back. Okay, it's pretty simple. However, that lends to the fixed camera angles, right? So when you're walking down a hallway in Resident Evil 1, the camera angle will start in one spot. Once you get to a certain point, a precipice, let's say, the camera angle will change. And that can make it a little jarring if you're using like an analog stick to move, which you can do in the alternate control scheme. Can make it a little jarring to where you have to stop and kind of reset where you're moving. But if you're using tank controls, well, if you're pressing forward, it doesn't matter if the camera angle changes, you're still moving forward. So what I really think is that this game is misunderstood. These fixed camera angles and tank controls make the game better. They do not take away from the experience, and let me explain. You see, back in the 90s, games were not so easy to make because there was so many restrictions and limitations with the hardware that you couldn't just take your ideas and put them into the game, right? The original Resident Evil 1 was supposed to be a first-person game, which shout out to Resident Evil 7 for doing that so many years later. People thought, oh, they're trying to copy PT. No, they always wanted to make it first-person because first-person is the most scary way to play a game. However, the PlayStation 1's hardware simply couldn't handle a first-person game that's being rendered in 3 dimensions. It's just too much processing power. So they changed it around, they tried making it 3D and third person, and it just wasn't working, it wasn't working. So what do? Well, they kind of looked around, they looked at some other horror games like Alone in the Dark, and they had found what they needed to create the perfect horror game for the PlayStation 1, and that is fixed camera angles. With fixed camera angles, now you can have backgrounds that are pre-rendered. That's right. You don't need to render the backgrounds in real time. They took this philosophy forward into the GameCube also, where this Resident Evil remake came out on. And so that is why when you're looking at this game and you're thinking, damn, this game came out in 2002? Yeah. It's because of the limitations that they were given, they were able to create such a beautiful and horrifying experience. With the static backgrounds now, you can have highly detailed areas, just dripping with detail and atmosphere compared to if you were to do it 3D modeled, like with Code Veronica. That game looks like shit, but this game looks great. It's because of these fixed camera angles. You just take these backgrounds, you put some VFX over it, like shadows and particle effects and stuff, and boom! You have one of the best looking games I've ever seen in my life with Resident Evil 1. It holds up to this day. I would say graphics don't even matter with most other game genres, but with survival horror, it does. Let me explain by giving an example with old horror movies. You see, my dad is a geezer, and one of his favorite movies ever is this little horror flick from back in the day called It, the Terror from Beyond Space. Now, the story for It, the Terror from Beyond Space is essentially the same story as Alien, one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies ever made. There's an alien that gets onto a spaceship. You're in space before you realize it. You can't really, you can't do anything in space. No one can hear you scream in space. So you're stuck on a spaceship with an alien that's trying to kill you. That's the premise of it, right? But why do we talk about Alien and not It, the Terror from Beyond Space? Pretty simple. It's because Alien still looks good, and It, the Terror from Beyond Space, you can see the strings on the rocket ship when they're taking off. It's pretty simple. Things that don't look scary aren't scary. You see, but fixed camera angles amplify the horror, and more than just being able to create a visually stunning game. Now when you walk into a room, maybe you can hear a zombie in the room, but you can't see it because of the way the camera angle is set up. That is terrifying. That is horror at its finest. Hearing something and not being able to see it. They play with this through the entire game. The fixed camera angles lend to the amount of scares that they can give you. It also lends to very creative, artistic camera angles and cinematography, like maybe the camera's set up behind a gate in the graveyard, or maybe when you enter into a room, boom, the camera's right in your face and you can't see anything else. That is scary. That's good stuff. It creates this artistic, almost movie-like quality to the game. They're really able to amplify the artistic value with this. And that's the thing, is other Resident Evil games maybe do any of these things individually better. Resident Evil 4 has like better gameplay and shooting and gunplay and all that stuff like that. It's rock solid when it comes to the gameplay department. No question. Resident Evil 2 Remake is one of the scariest games I've ever played in my life. I think it's definitely way scarier than Resident Evil 1, really, truly. You know, it's terrifying. The modern graphics, everything like that, it's truly horrifying. Resident Evil 7, also one of the scariest games I've ever played. Probably more scary than Resident Evil 1. It's got interesting map, it's interconnected, it's very great. But why aren't those games my favorite? I think the YouTuber Boulder Punch put it best, and that is the whole of Resident Evil 1 Remake is greater than the sum of its parts. It's not the scariest. It doesn't have the best gameplay. It doesn't have the best graphics. It doesn't do any of these things particularly the best compared to any of them. But what it does is it puts it all together the best. The puzzles, the gameplay, the horror, the atmosphere, the graphics, the map, all of these things are firing at a high enough level to create, in my opinion, the greatest Resident Evil experience ever. And I urge you to just put down Resident Evil 4 for like 1 minute. Look, I get it. I love Resident Evil 4 too, man. Trust me, I get it. But put it down for just a minute and give the original Resident Evil 1 a chance. I think that if you can get past the tank controls, which, you know what, I'm just going to say it, makes the game even scarier too. That's one thing I forgot. It's hard to get around zombies because of the controls. Makes it even scarier. But regardless, if you can get past the tank controls and you can get past the fixed camera angles and maybe put yourself in the mindset of a gamer in 1996 maybe, and just play with it a little bit and see. And I think you'll walk out of that experience thinking, wow, I wish they would make another one like this. And I do too. But that's it for me. I'm not going to just keep ranting on and on about why this is the greatest game ever. You need to figure that out for yourself. Go play it, I urge you. But until then, I appreciate you watching. It was tons of fun. I really enjoy this. My first time doing a green screen. I'm basically the poor man's Evan Helbling, which is a poor man's Internet Pit Stop, which is a poor man's Nakey Jakey. So you must be pretty broke to be watching me. Man, God, I know. I wish Nakey Jakey would post more too. But hey, I'll be posting a little bit more than him. I don't know how much more. Until then, I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. I think we're going to be talking Fallout New Vegas. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye!